along, make sure that it is there for our kids and our grandchildren. Mr. President, at this point, if the senator from Tennessee would like some time, I'm happy to yield him 3 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
I thank the senator from Vermont. This is a body that operates by unanimous consent, which is a hard thing to get accustomed to until you've ever been a part of it. That means any one of us can stop the Senate from opening or having a prayer or saying the Pledge of Allegiance or going to a bill. So, what I'm about to say, I don't want in any way to diminish the right of every senator, such as the senator from Kentucky, to have an opportunity to object to a unanimous consent request. But when everyone has a lot of rights, unless we have some agreement, it's hard to get much done. And I've been sometimes critical of the majority leader, but I've also tried to support and praise things that he's done when I can, because I know that either being the Democratic or the Republican leader is not an easy job. So I want to commend the majority leader for offering to accept all relevant amendments, which is a broad category, and which this bill seems particularly appropriate for that, because we have competing visions for what to do about the post office. It's gone through committee, the regular order. The bills are bipartisan. There are not a lot of partisan differences here. There are a lot of differences, and they need to be worked out, and probably we've got 2 weeks to do it. So this is a ripe situation for that if we can get consent to do it. I'm disappointed that the majority leader felt he had to go on and offer cloture to move on because he already had control of the situation with the right to fill the tree. So I would hope that we could respect the senator from Kentucky's right and that of other senators to offer unanimous consent, to object to unanimous consent agreement, but see if we can't find some way to move ahead with an agreement on relevant amendments. That means the majority leader doesn't pick the amendments. We all get to offer them if they're relevant. The majority leader has a difficult job, so I hope as he reflects on this, he'll consider that it's much easier to get an agreement for relevant amendments in our caucus, I don't know what it's like in the Democratic caucus, if we're able to talk it through a little bit and secure consent for that before it's offered. That would be the job of Senator McConnell, the Republican leader. So here we are. We were on the postal bill for 5 full minutes. And now we're off on a wrong track. We can move back very easily. Majority Leader has the ability to control any amendment through his filling the tree. Doesn't need the cloture amendment. And hopefully, if the senators on this side will carefully consider the offer of all relevant amendments, that would give us a chance to offer many amendments. It's the right of any senator to object to that. But as one senator, I appreciate the gesture. And I hope the majority leader will give Senator McConnell an opportunity, if he wants it, I'm just speaking for myself here, if he wants it, to work through our caucus and see if we can get a relevant amendment agreement.
Yield for 15 seconds. I did for 15 seconds. I just want to.
Senator from Massachusetts.
No, I asked the senator from Vermont would yield. Could I? Thank you, Senator.
The senator from Massachusetts has the floor.
Massachusetts yield for 15
Thank you, Mr.
seconds.
President. Yes, I would yield for 15 seconds for the gentleman.
I just want to thank the senator from Tennessee for his constructive comments. He and I have spoken about trying to work on a relevant standard at the beginning of a bill as a way of moving a bill forward with the greatest possible leniency without getting into totally non-relevant subjects. And I just thought his comments were constructive. I wanted to thank him for it, and I hope we can continue to work together on this relevance course is perhaps the best way to get us out of the kind of knots that we're frequently tied in. I want to thank my friend from Massachusetts. If he was recognized, I think he was. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I concur with the senator from Tennessee, and listen, we need to step back and move back a little bit here. This is a bill that I'm the co-sponsor of. Worked very hard. I noted in the majority leader's comments he referenced Senator Copper, Senator Lieberman Collins, but I spent the equal amount of time working on this bill. A co-sponsor, care very deeply about our postal workers and the security and the viability of the post office itself. And I'm hopeful also that the majority leader will step back, because before we left, we had 2 great weeks of working on relevant issues. We had the insider trading bill, passed 96-3. The leader allowed us to have a couple of days to get our members in order, not 4 hours. We should have the ability, when you have amendments or issues that involve our members, that they have the right to bring forward in any form that they want. We should have the ability to get together with them before we move on to another totally different, very important issue, the Violence Against Women Act, which I'm also a co-sponsor, so I don't care what one we go to, but this one is relevant. It's time sensitive. It needs to be addressed right away. And I've been honored to work with Senator Carper once again, and Senator Lieberman once again, and Senator Collins once again. I'm working on something that could be very, very important and will be very important for our country. And we're here today, and we were here today, because the post office is clearly at a crossroads. They're in deep trouble. And for more than 2 centuries, it's played a key role in both our economy and for our communities. And for decades, communities large and small, and citizens far and wide have come to depend on the regular and dependable service 6 days a week for a reasonable price of their mail. It's plain and simple. And in the past, a steady volume of mail has provided that adequate revenue, but things have changed. Yet in the face of the technological changes and difficult economic conditions, first-class mail volume, as you know, has dropped by over 1/4 in the last 5 years. And it's forecasted to do the same thing over the next 5 years. And the business model that proved successful for generations is now sinking the Postal Service in a pool of red ink. And as we all know, they've lost over $13 billion in the last 2 years, and almost on the verge of bankruptcy. As we know, the workforce is too big, costs are too high, and operations are being maintained at a capacity unequal with the revenue that's actually coming in. And we need to stop that right away. And the number of the delivery addresses increases every day, and the Postal Service's liabilities to its employees grows each and every day. And the longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes. And we are up against a deadline, and we do need to work together in a bipartisan, bicameral manner. This is not about Democrats or Republicans or independents. It's about us as a body showing once again, trying to reestablish that trust with the American people that, my goodness, the United States Senate can do things together, as we did with the crowdfunding jobs bill, as we did with the Arlington Cemetery bill, as we've done with the 3% withholding, as we've done most recently with the insider trading. We can do these things. This is a no-brainer. Everybody here agrees that we need to save the post office. And we all have some very real concerns, rural concerns, city concerns. Everybody has concerns, and we should have the ability to have these aired out. And we need to do it right now. And I would once again encourage the majority leader to step back from the path he's chosen on moving on another bill, because one member had a deep concern about what's happening in Egypt, as many of us do. Would it hurt to give him his 15 minutes and then move on? I just don't get it. And it's such a disservice to the American people. And we need to put the Postal Service on the path to solvency right away. Right away. And the bill that's been brought here has been worked on between our 4 offices, probably 300 or 400 hours easy. Throw in the office hours for all our staff. It's probably upwards of 1,000 hours we've been working on this bill. Something that I speak to our constituents, working with Congressman Lynch in Massachusetts and others, to try to make sure that we can have a plan, a good base, a good starting point. We may not agree on everything, but I'll tell you what, we all agree that we need to save the United States Post Office, and we also need to give them the tools and the resources to do their job and be viable and competitive into the new century. We all agree on that. So we have a little hiccup, then we're going to move on to another bill. Once again, just as important, happy to get on it. I'm a co-sponsor, but come on. We deserve to give the American people better. We should be doing better. We need to recognize and address right away the serious financial condition of the post office and provide it with the flexibility to cut costs, but do so in a way that's responsible to its employees and considerate of the customers that are continuing to use their service, to grant them the ability to find ways to increase revenue and innovate without competing with private industry or giving them an unfair advantage over private industry is a good thing. Also to make sure that rates don't rise abruptly, that's also a good thing. We need to ensure that the Postal Service maintains a certain standard of service, so we'll have businesses and individuals who want to continue to use that service. And it's a delicate balancing act with little disagreement on that. There's also little disagreement that the current size in both workforce and postal operations is neither sustainable nor required for the long term. We must reduce costs, and we need to have greater efficiencies, and they must be found if the the Postal Service is to survive and thrive in the future. Yet the Postal Service still plays a significant role in our economy. We all know it. There's a standard that they have to hit, and we all demand it. And I fear if we do not pass this bill, the Postal Service will continue to advocate for a more aggressive approach, and we are up against a deadline. If we fail to address this, the Postmaster General will have the ability to do things that I think will not be in the best interest of everybody in this chamber and the American citizens, in that we can provide different tools that he would be able to use, and we would be able to have some input in that. In my home state of Massachusetts, the Postal Service has made plans to close 4 main processing facilities and dozens of post offices. Yet there has been a lack of detailed explanation provided to the government leaders, to me and others, employees or the surrounding communities, to fully justify these changes as both necessary and prudent. And we can do better, and we should do better. Eliminating the overnight delivery standard or days of delivery will be transformational shifts in service. We don't know whether those are appropriate or not. And little is known about the combined impact of these major changes as they will have on the postal customers or to future revenues. Now, Mr. President, as we know, volume declines mean decreased revenue for some, and driving costs up and getting those costs under control are driving users away in alarming rates. And these plans require thoughtful consideration of alternative solutions, public input, cautious implementation. And we have, in fact, done that with our bill. We have sat down, as I said, for more hours than I can tell you, trying to work through every issue. We've met with the players ad nauseum to try to make sure we address each and every consideration, including members of this caucus and this chamber. And there are members on the other side, the majority party, who have their own ideas as how to fix things. And we have amendments here and people here who want to address their issues as well, and they should all be heard. Since when do we bring up a bill and then do it in a day? Especially something like this. It's so massive and affects so many people and so much of our industry. So we're going to do it, what, in a day, 2 days? I mean, even when we did the insider trading, we did it in 4 or 5 days. We've done bills here. This bill, I figured, is a good 6, 7, 8 days of hardcore debating, letting people come up with their ideas to try to rescue an industry that is such an integral part of their communities. I want, and others want in this chamber, the postal employees to be treated fairly. And we recognize the dedication and their service in this bill. And we have over 100,000 employees eligible for retirement today. And rather than advocating for layoff authority, our bill provides the means for the Postal Service to increase attrition rates through buyouts and separation incentives to leave the post office voluntarily and with dignity. And that's deeply important to me. And additional provisions of the bill include long overdue improvements in federal workmen's compensation programs, a more affordable schedule of pre-funding the Retiree Health Benefit Trust Fund, and encouraging eligible retirees to join the Medicare rolls. These are no doubt difficult times for the Postal Service, and some very, very tough choices are going to be made. And so far in this legislative session, the Senate has shown that there are issues, as I said earlier in my presentation, that we can find bipartisan solutions and efforts towards. And in closing, I'm confident that this is one of them, and I look forward to having our bill heard, and we get back on track, have the leader step back, allow us to come up with an agreement of relevant amendments, and start doing the people's business. So I'm once again grateful for the leadership of Senator Lieberman, Collins, and Carper that they have shown over the years, and I look forward to working on this bill with them. And I yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are engaged in a...
Would ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to follow him following his remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, we are engaged in a very important debate while the clock is ticking on literally the future of the post office. But I want to spend a few moments alerting my colleagues to another issue that is rapidly approaching. On July 1st, if we do not act, the interest rate on subsidized student loans will double from 3.4% to 6.8%, impacting more than 7 million students, including more than 36,000 in my home state of Rhode Island. I've introduced legislation, the Student Loan Affordability Act, to stop the doubling of student loan interest rates as of July 1st this year. My colleagues have already joined, many of them, Senators Begich, Sherrod Brown, Durbin, Senator Franken, the presiding officer, Tim Johnson, Senator Klobuchar, Leahy, Murray, Sanders, Schumer, Stabenow, Whitehouse, and Wyden. As co-sponsors of legislation, I thank them, and I urge all of my colleagues to join us in supporting this legislation. If we do not act, the average borrower will have to pay approximately $2,800 more in interest on their loans. Students who take out the maximum $23,000 in subsidized student loans could owe approximately $5,000 more over the 10-year repayment period. Students and families simply cannot absorb these costs in this tough economy in the face of rising tuition and dwindling state support for higher education. And this particular measure will hit middle-income families the hardest because they are the ones who rely most significantly on these subsidized student loans. The subsidized student loan program is a need-based financial aid program. To get the low rate and the in-school interest subsidy, students must demonstrate economic need. Nearly 60% of the dependent students who qualify for subsidized loans come from families with incomes of less than $60,000, and that is literally the middle class and the working poor of this country. This is an issue of fairness, and at a time, ironically, of historically low interest rates. For example, the Federal Reserve has set the target interest rate for federal funds between 0 and 0.25%. The Fed is lending money to banks at 0.25%. We, at the same time, are asking middle-income families to pay twice as much, 6.8%, a huge discrepancy in the loans they pay for education. And we also recognize, all of us, that the key to our future is an educated America. It just seems, again, given the interest rate environments where banks can get money overnight at 0.25, and we're telling students they have to start paying 6.8, not 3.4, it doesn't make sense. It's in our national interest to ensure that these students not only get educated, but don't leave school with a mountain of debt that they'll never be able to scale. We need more students graduating from our colleges and our universities and our professional schools because that's what's going to power our economy in the future. We won't be globally competitive if we do not do that. In 1980, the gap between the lifetime earnings of a college graduate and a high school graduate was 40%. In 2010, it was 74%. By 2025, it is projected to be 96%. The message is clear. If you cannot get post-secondary education, you're virtually going to be condemned to being far behind in terms of income, in terms of the ability to support your families. We must do this. And researchers have found since at least 1980, we haven't been producing a sufficient number of college-educated students to meet the demands of industry. If you go to businesses throughout Rhode Island, throughout the nation, they'll tell you, listen, they have jobs. They just can't find the people with those high-level skills to fill those jobs. So every different criteria argues strenuously for this legislation. In Rhode Island, we have 41% of our adults with college degrees. By 2018, it's estimated that 61% of the jobs will need a college degree. We have a 20% gap that is already open up in the next 4 years, and we've got to fill it. And the wrong way to fill it is to make college more expensive. Now, I held a roundtable recently with all the presidents of my universities and colleges in Rhode Island, and they said keeping this interest rate low, relatively low, is absolutely critical. They're all worried about the fact that by July 1st, unless we act, we'll see a doubling of this interest rate. And frankly, this is an issue that has had bipartisan support. In 2007, on a very strong bipartisan basis, we enacted the College Cost Reduction Act. We cut the rate from 6.8 to 3.4. And back in 2007, 3.4 was a reasonable rate. In the Senate, the legislation passed on a vote of 79 to 12. More than two-thirds of Republican senators, 34 out of 49, supported it. President George W. Bush signed it into law. We've got to retrieve, before July 1st, that bipartisan spirit that motivated the initial legislation so that we can avoid doubling the interest rate that college students will pay for these loans. It's a matter of major priority for us, not just for the time, the short time, but for the future of the country. We have 75 days. The clock is ticking. We've got to move. If we don't, then millions, literally, of middle-class students and families will be denied the opportunity effectively of getting their higher educations. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I rise, first of all, to comment on our failure to move forward with debate and discussion and amendments on this very important bill. The sponsors of the legislation and I may have very different proposals to address this compelling issue, but neither the sponsors nor I believe that we should not have debate, discussion, and amendment. Unfortunately, again, because of a requirement by members that their amendment be voted on, apparently the majority leader will now move on, fill up the tree, amendments will not be allowed, and we will move on to other legislation. Mr. President, this affects 500 and some thousand of American employees. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. We're talking about an urgent need to restructure and reform the postal system in America. And so now, because of demands of senators to have votes on non-germane amendments, we will now move on to other legislation. I wonder when we will address the issue. May 15th is a very critical date in this whole scenario, and I would like to talk a bit about my proposal and that basically which is modeled after the bill that is pending in the other body, the House of Representatives. Yesterday, the Washington Post editorial says the time for real postal reform is now. For anyone who still does not quite grasp the technological obsolescence U.S. Postal Service's calamitous financial situation, here are a few facts from Thursday's Government Accountability Office. Before I go through that, I'd like to quote from a Washington Post article back November 18th, and it specifically refers to the pending legislation. And it says, the 21st Century Postal Service Act of 2011, proposed by Senators Joseph Lieberman and Susan Collins and passed last week by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs, is not a bill to save the U.S. Postal Service. It is a bill to postpone saving the Postal Service. The service announcement that it lost $15.1 billion in the most recent fiscal year was billed as good news, which suggests how dire its situation is. The only reason the loss was not greater is that Congress postponed the Postal Service payment of $5.5 billion to pre-fund retiree health benefits. According to the Government Accountability Office, even $50 billion would not be enough to repay all of the Postal Service's debt and address current and future operating deficits that are caused by its inability to cut costs quickly enough to match declining mail volume and revenue. The Collins-Lieberman bill, which transfers $7 billion from the Federal Employee Retirement System to the USPS, is to be used for offering buyouts to its workers and paying down debts, can stave off collapse for a short time at best. I want to point out, this is the Washington Post view. This is the Government Accountability Office view, not necessarily that of this senator. Nor do the other measures in the bill offer much hope. The bill extends the payment schedule for the Postal Service to pre-fund its employee retirement benefits from 10 to 40 years. Yes, the funding requirement is onerous, but if the USPS cannot afford to pay for these benefits now, what makes it likely they'll be able to pay later when mail volumes most likely will have plummeted further? The bill requires 2 more years of studies. That's one of the favorite tactics around here, is more studies. 2 more years of studies to determine whether a switch to 5-day delivery would be viable. I have to repeat that to my colleagues. We need to study for 2 years as to whether we need to reduce mail delivery from 6 days to 5 days. Now, isn't that marvelous? Isn't that marvelous? 2 years to study. What it is, it's delaying what is absolutely necessary, and that is to have 5-day-a-week delivery. One of my colleagues said, well, it might keep someone from getting a newspaper in the mail. Well, we're talking about $50 billion short, and we can't even reduce the number of days, which has been recommended by the Postmaster General himself. So we're going to have 2 years to study whether we should switch to 5-day-a-week and whether that would be viable. These studies would be performed by a regulatory body that has already completed a laborious inquiry into the subject, a process that required almost a year. So it will take 3 years. This seems a pointless delay, especially given that a majority of Americans support the switch to 5-day delivery. And then they go on to say, we're sympathetic to Congress's wish to avoid killing jobs, and the bill does include provisions we have supported, such as requiring arbitrators to take the Postal Service's financial situation into account during collective bargaining and demanding a plan for providing mail services at retail outlets. But this plan hits the snooze button on many of the Postal Service's underlying problems. 80% of the Postal Service budget goes towards its workforce. Many of its workers are provided by no layoff clauses. Our Postal Service has no layoff clauses in its contracts. I wonder if most Americans know that. $7 billion worth of buyouts may help to shrink the workforce, but this so-called overpayment will come from taxpayers' pockets, and it is a hefty price to pay for further delay. There is an alternative, a bill proposed by Representative Darrell Issa, Republican California, that would create a supervisory body to oversee the Postal Service's finances and, if necessary, negotiate new labor contracts. The bill is not perfect, but it offers a serious solution that does not leave taxpayers on the hook. I just want to read in the April 14th editorial. I think that it sums up the situation. For better or for worse, our children's children will marvel at the fact that anyone ever used to send the paper thing called a letter. They'll be amazed to learn that we unnecessarily spent billions of dollars propping up a huge, inefficient system for moving these things around. But what would really astound future generations is that we borrowed that money and left it to them to pay back. There is no better description of what this bill is all about. And my friends, one of the things we need, and I'll be glad to go into a number of details, but really it is very clear that Congress and the Postal Service cannot make decisions. So what we need is the only thing that we found to be the way to reduce our bases in America was a BRAC. So what we really need is a BRAC to identify those post offices and other facilities that need to be closed. And I want to go back to what they said about what future generations. My friends, we now communicate with these. We now communicate with email. We now communicate with tweet. We now communicate electronically in ways that we used to do with pen and paper or typewriter. And that's a fact. And so we have seen a dramatic reduction in regular mail. We have seen it go in a very dramatic fashion, which will accelerate over time. Listen, when guys my age are doing this, everybody's doing it. And the fact is that everybody will be doing it, and they do not have to put a 30 or 40 or 50 cent or 60-cent stamp on a letter in order to get a message to their friends, families, business associates, etc. So instead of doing as some did when the Pony Express was replaced by the railroads and try to pop up a failing industry, let's find a graceful exit and at the same time preserve those functions of the Postal Service that will be around for a long time. And there are functions that could stay around for a long time. But in a dramatically changed world, we now have instant communications, we have instant news cycles, and we have a proliferation, thank God, of information and knowledge unknown in previous years or in history we have today. And there are upsides and there are downsides. The Postal Service delivering letters does not play any role in the future of information being shared and made available to citizens all over the world. First-class mail makes up more than half of postal revenues. It's down more than 25% since 2001. In the last 11 years, it's down 25%. And I promise you that will accelerate. It continues on a downward spiral with no sign of recovery. This, combined with unsustainable 80% labor costs and labor contracts that contain no layoff clauses, points to the hard reality that the Postal Service is broken. And by the way, that is also the conclusions of the Government Accountability Office, which just recently issued a report that entitled Challenges Related to Restructuring the Postal Service's Retail Network. In 2011, the American Postal Workers Union and USPS management negotiated a 4-year agreement that limits transferring employees of an installation or craft to no more than 50 miles away. How? How in the world do you negotiate an agreement that you won't transfer anybody further than 50 miles away? If USPS management cannot place employees within 50 miles, the parties are to jointly determine what steps may be taken, which includes putting postal employees on standby, which occurs when workers are idled but paid their full salary due to reassignments and reorganization efforts. I am not making that up. If you are a Postal Service worker and you want to be reassigned more than 50 years, you cannot do it. And if you can't do it, you put employees on, quote, standby, and they are idled but paid their full salary due to reassignments and reorganization efforts. My friends, it helps us understand why 80% of their costs are in personnel costs. The proposed Commission on Postal Reorganization could broaden. The GAO makes an argument for basically a BRAC. They call it Commission on Postal Reorganization. The proposed Commission on Postal Reorganization could broaden the current focus on individual facility closures, which are often contentious, time-consuming, and inefficient, to a broader network-wide restructuring similar to the BRAC approach. In other restructuring efforts where this approach has been used, expert panels have successfully informed and permitted difficult restructuring decisions, helping to provide consensus on intractable decisions. As previously noted, the 2003 report of the President's Commission on the USPS also recommended such an approach relating to the consolidation and rationalization of USPS's mail processing and distribution infrastructure. We also reported, which I'm quoting from the GAO report, we also reported in 2010 that Congress may want to consider this approach to assist in restructuring organizations that are facing key financial challenges. GAO has testified that USPS cannot continue providing services at current levels without dramatic changes in its cost structure. Optimizing the Postal Service's mail processing network would help USPS by bringing down costs related to excess and inefficient resources. They go on to say the lack of flexibility to consolidate its workforce. The Postal Service stated it must be able to reduce the size of its workforce in order to ensure that its costs are less than revenue. Action in this area is important since USPS workforce accounts for about 80% 80% of its costs. So we're faced with a very difficult decision. And the amendment and substitute that I have has a number of provisions. I see that my friend from Connecticut is on the floor that wants to discuss this issue as well. But the fact is, we are looking at a postal service that once upon a time was so important to the United States of America that it was even mentioned in the Constitution of the United States of America. And since those days, and in the intervening years, the Postal Service performed an incredibly outstanding job in delivering mail and communications to our citizens all over America, in all settings, in all parts of our country. And they deserve great credit for doing so. But now we face a technological change, which is now, as I understand, a huge portion of their mail now is made up so-called junk mail, which is advertising mail. Americans in greater and greater numbers are making use of this new technology, as I pointed out. And it's time that we understood that. And it's time that we stop this incredible hemorrhaging of money, including, according to the Postal Service itself, by 2020, they're expecting to face up to a $238 billion shortfall. $238 billion shortfall in just the next 8 years. $238 billion. The Postal Service has reached its borrowing limit of $15 billion, and even with dramatic cost savings of $12 billion and workforce reduction of 110,000 postal employees in the past 4 years, the Postal Service is still losing money. In fact, the Postal Service has said that it could lose as much as $18 billion annually by 2015 if not given the necessary flexibility it needs to cut costs and transform. So what does the legislation before us do? Delay by 2 years a study to figure out whether we should go from 6 days a week to 5 days a week. Now, I wonder how long it would take some smart people to figure out whether we should go to 5-day delivery versus 6-day. According to the sponsors of the bill, it takes them 2 years after they've already studied it for a year. Remarkable, remarkable. What we really need, because we need, unfortunately, another testimony to the lack of political courage of members of Congress and members of the administration, we need a BRAC process. We need a BRAC process where we can appoint a number of men and women who are knowledgeable and who are willing to make these decisions for us. And then those decisions would be made, and it would come back for an up or down vote in the Congress of the United States. So I point out again, this bill before us locks in the current service standards for 3 years. It will make it impossible to go forward with the vast bulk of the public Postal Service's planned network consolidations for at least 3 years. Puts in place significant new steps, including public notice and comment before a processing plant can be closed. It gives appeal rights to the PRC for processing plant closures and gives binding authority to this PRC to keep a plant open to protect service standards. It adds a number of new regulations designed to make it more difficult to close post offices. It includes a post office closure moratorium until retail service standards are created. It gives the PRC the ability to enforce a, quote, retail service standard, which would enable the PRC to not only require appealed post offices to stay open, but even require new post offices to be open if a complaint is lodged. It continues the 2-year delay before USPS can go to a 5-day, as I mentioned, and it removes a provision in the reported text that required arbitrators to take into account pay comparability in any decision. It replaces it with vague language that says, quote, nothing in this section may be construed to limit the relevant factors that the arbitration board may take into consideration. Now, if that isn't vague language, I don't know what is. Let me repeat it. They want the board to, quote, do nothing in that section of the legislation that could be construed to limit the relevant factors that the arbitration board may take into consideration. Well, that's pretty good guidance, isn't it? So I would go on and on. And in summary, though, I would just go back again to the Washington Post, it's the final paragraph of their article, and I repeat again. And this is really what this is all about, my friends. For better or worse, our children's children will marvel at the fact that anyone ever used to send the paper thing called a letter. They'll be amazed to learn that we unnecessarily spent billions of dollars propping up a huge, inefficient system for moving those things around. But what would really astound future generations is that we borrowed that money and left it to them to pay it back. I hope that we could have, I want to thank the sponsors of this bill for the great effort that they made. I think we have open and honest disagreements that deserve debate and discussion and amendments. They deserve debate, they deserve amendments, and they deserve honest debate. We are talking about the future of the Postal Service in America, and we are talking about literally over time hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. I hope the Majority Leader will reconsider and allow amendments to be proposed. I hope my colleagues will not insist on a vote on a non-relevant amendment as a condition to moving forward with legislation. That's not right either. And I have said time after time, because I've been around here for a long time, we should have people sit down, both majority and minority and Republican leader, and say, okay, how many amendments do you want? Which amendments do you want voted on? Give them a reasonable handful, which we did not that long ago, and then have those votes and move forward. This is important legislation. The senator from Connecticut will point out that May 15th is a critical day. This issue cannot be strung out forever. So I hope that we can sit down with the majority and Republican leader and come up with some amendments that would be allowed and then move forward. I don't know if my amendment will pass or not, but I think it deserves a vote, and I think it deserves debate and consideration. Again, I want to thank the sponsors, 3 of the 4 of which are on the floor for their hard work, and I look forward to the opportunity to having honest and open debate and discussion on this very important piece of legislation. I know that they and their staffs have put in hundreds and hundreds of hours of work on this legislation to bring it to the floor. Madam Chair, I yield the floor, Madam President.
Madam President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. I agree with the Senator from Arizona's statements about the Majority Leader in allowing us to actually work on relevant amendments that are important to each and every person in this chamber to make sure that we can address those very real issues to move not only this issue forward, but try to attempt to rescue the post office. And I also agree with him when he was commenting on some of the deals that were cut by the Postmaster General in dealing with contracting. We actually have spoken about this many times. I asked the Postmaster General personally, how did you and why, what was the thought process associated with entering into a contract? Did you want us to be the bad guys, or what was the thought process there? Because our hands are somewhat tied in dealing with some of these legislative issues. There's nobody that I respect more than the gentleman that just walked out of this chamber. However, I have to respectfully disagree, because during our many long hours of deliberation between staff and co-sponsors, we wrestled with many things that were brought up in his presentation. And with all due respect, I've read many other articles that comment on the fact that we are moving boldly to try to rescue the post office, taking into consideration everybody's, not only the union workers, but obviously the Postmaster General, the citizens, i.e. the users of the Postal Service, and everybody in this chamber. The impending financial crisis at the post office, I can tell you, was the foremost in our minds. It was the only consideration we had, was trying to make the post office viable for future generations to use. That's the only consideration we had. And the fact that we are here today, and I guess I'm not going to be able to move forward on this, it's mind-boggling. But any legitimate reform of the Postal Services needs to recognize that we need to cut costs and we need to streamline an organization that is simply too big, especially in light of the future mail volumes and the potential decreasing of the future mail volumes. And our bill recognizes this necessity, but where it differs from the senator from Arizona's approach is in our recognition of the full impact that major service changes will have on postal customers and future revenues. The Saturday delivery service of the post office is one of the strongest benefits that it has. I mean, when you're competing out with the other entities that are delivering mail or delivering packages and the like, that is the leg up that the Postal Service has, and we want to deliver that. As a matter of fact, once we make, and I just want to address two other things. It's not the taxpayers that are paying this money. It's the ratepayers that have already paid into the system and is in fact overpaid into the Postal Service and some of their retirement issues that the retirement program that we have. We're merely giving them that money back to allow them to get their fiscal and financial house in order to offer some maybe buyouts to get these 100,000 people retired so we can reduce the cost to the Postal Service. And once we make these changes, the senator from Arizona also referenced that it's going to take a 2-year study. No, it's not a 2-year study to see if we're going to cut down Saturday service. They want to just cut it right off. If we do all of these other changes, the consideration that we did in a joint and bipartisan manner was to determine whether, in fact, hey, if we've done these, do we still need to cut the Saturday service, which, by the way, is the benefit that the Postal Service has over everybody else. So are we going to contribute to that downward spiral, or are we actually going to work together and give them a little bit of flexibility to say, oh my goodness, we've done all these changes, we don't need to cut Saturday delivery. We can still do it. We may need to streamline it. We may need to do curbside instead of going to the door. We may need to do clusters. We may need to shift it a little bit in some rural areas, but we've already cut, we've retirees, we've cut, we've consolidated, we've done everything. That's what the 2-year study is. If it doesn't work, we'll do it. We'll cut it. Bang. But just to cut off your nose to spite your face, I mean, it makes no sense to me. So as the Postal Regulatory Commission has pointed out time and time again, the Postal Service's assumptions on customer revenue and impact as a result of these proposals have been weak at best and non-existent at worst. We need to make sure that when and if we give the Postmaster General the ability to do these certain things, that he's going to do them. And there's no two ways about it. He needs to draw a line in the sand and, or more importantly, get everybody in the same room. I can't imagine that our postal employees, whatever union they're from, want to have the post office go bankrupt and be out of business. I can't imagine the people listening up here don't want to get their cards from their grandchildren, get their checks, get their magazines, get the things that they've been accustomed to. I'm listening to the senator from Arizona. I'm sitting here signing letters that I'm going to be putting in the mail. So how ironic is that? I'm sitting here signing letters and the senator, I have great respect, is, oh, we communicate by this. Yes, I communicate by this, but the personal touch and that feeling of how you really feel, I think is best expressed right here. That's why I take the time and effort to respond to not only my constituents, but to my family and friends. Call me old-fashioned. Call me old-fashioned. I think there's something worth saving here, and that's what I'm working on with. And let me just say, by the way, the senator from Connecticut, what a legacy he's going to leave. So we just did the insider trading bill, and without Senator Collins and Senator Lieberman's help, that never would have come to fruition had they not actually had the guts to move that forward. What a legacy to leave under that, and then to actually have another legacy to save the United States Post Office. And they didn't even name a post office after you. I mean, I'll make that effort, okay? The Joe Lieberman Post Office, that'd be great. And I'll put it in Massachusetts. How about that? And you need to have a sense of humor around here, folks. Trust me sometimes. You need to laugh at some of the things that happen here. But in all seriousness, we need to take these drastic steps in order to provide the economic viability of the Postal Service. In our bill, Senate 1789, we'll have a better way. The likelihood of the House bill passing is, I'm understanding, quite remote. But there is a good likelihood that we can actually get this out first if the majority leader allows us to move forward and actually get it out the door and put the pressure on the House to, join with us. in a bipartisan, bicameral way. So I want to just say that I was honored to be a part of this effort to rescue the post office, as I've been honored to work on everything in our committee. And we're going to miss you very much. I've said that before, and I'm not kidding. And I know Senator Collins feels the same way. And to do these two major pieces of legislation, I'm just excited to see what else we can do before he leaves. So with that in mind, I will yield the floor and note that I'm excited to continue to work on this very important initiative. I encourage the Majority Leader to allow us to move forward and get this done, and then we'll move on to the Violence Against Women Act. As I said before, I'm a co-sponsor of both, so either way, flip a coin, I win. There's heads on both sides. But let's do this one first because it is time sensitive. We have till, I believe it's May 15th, if I'm not mistaken,
right,
in order to do it and have some control over these cuts. Otherwise, you could see draconian cuts willy-nilly without any input from us at all and no protections for our constituents. So that being said, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Madam President, first let me thank my friend, the senator from Massachusetts, for his kind words about me. It's really been a pleasure to work with him. He's been a great and devoted member of our committee and worked hard on, actually introduced, along with Senator Gillibrand, the two bills that became the Stock Act, the anti-insider trading by members of Congress, and worked as the ranking member on the subcommittee that Senator Carper chairs that has been working focused on saving the United States Postal Service. So I appreciate his kind words and the stated intention to name a post office for me, and I just hope he names one that is not then closed shortly thereafter. Also thank him for doing his part personally for the post office by continuing to write letters and sign them. I tell you, we all personally do. I'm using email as much as anyone else. You know, I discovered, I'm going to wander a bit here in preparing for this, my last year in the Senate, and how you wind things down, that they actually keep our emails on disks, and they can be stored in libraries as you would normal memos. We do reserve the right to edit somewhat, but so much of the community, so we're privileged in that way, but so much of the communication that goes on between people on email is effectively lost in the ether of cyberspace. And when you think about the richness of history, that how much of history comes from letters that were written or typed over time, I think that though the trend here is clear, more and more will be done on the internet, on email, I think people are going to still want to write and receive letters. That's just one of the reasons why the post office should stay what it is. Not what it is now, but remain a viable institution, which is not only important for the slightly sentimental reasons I've just mentioned, but because millions of jobs in our society, in our country, depend on the Postal Service. And there are, though email and internet are changing the reality of communications in our world, there are some things that, in addition to mail, that will always best be done through the services of the U.S. Postal Service and not through the internet. Some of that is the catalogs and magazines that we get through the mail, but some of it are the packages, medicine, products that people buy over the internet that have to be delivered, and most of that is actually delivered the last mile by the United States Postal Service. So I thank my friend from Massachusetts for responding to Senator McCain's statement. To describe where we are simplistically on this, I know that there are some people who feel that the bipartisan bill that came out of our committee, Senator Collins, Senator Carper, Senator Brown, and I, does too much, is too tough on the post office, and so they're concerned about it. Senator McCain's on the other side. He doesn't think, and I'm sure there are others, that we've gone far enough, quickly enough. I think we've found the right spot. I think this is a balanced middle way proposal, but make no mistake about it, The substitute bill that has been filed is not a status quo bill. It authorizes and facilitates exactly the kind of significant change in the U.S. Postal Service that the reality of its declining business demands that we propose. So in most of the cases, with the exception of the 6 to 5 day delivery that I'll come back to in a minute, 6 to 5 day delivery, to change that requires legislative authorization. And I hope somebody puts an amendment in that would authorize the Post Office to immediately go from 6 to 5 day delivery, because I'd like to see what the sentiment here is in the Senate. My guess is, for the reasons that the senator from Massachusetts stated very eloquently, that people are not ready for that precipitous change from 6 to 5 days. That if we do some of the things that Senator McCain is proposing, will make such rapid and dramatic changes in the Postal Service that it will have the contrary effect to what people intend, and it will diminish its services so rapidly that it will accelerate its downfall by decreasing its revenues. I mean, this is perhaps not the right parallel, but I remember, Madam President, years ago when I was in the state Senate in Connecticut, we had a real problem with the publicly supported bus transportation running a deficit, and one of the inevitable proposals was to raise the cost of the bus fare. Well, of course, one of the logical and sensible reactions to that, which happened, is that fewer people rode the bus because it cost more, and it got in more trouble. And that's exactly the kind of downward cycle that the sensible change that we're facilitating in this bill will make possible. The post offices will be closed under this bill. Mail processing facilities will be closed. A lot of employees will leave the post office department, but this will all be done according to standards and in a methodical way that I think will ultimately not only save a lot of money for the post office, and I expect we'll have an official estimate on that, savings derived from our bill soon from the U.S. Post Office, that is in the next day or two, but it will do so in a way that doesn't break people away from the Postal Service and put it into a more rapid spiral downward. As a matter of process, I want to say in response to my friend from Arizona, Senator McCain, his amendment, first I want to say that I appreciate what he said about the amendment from the senator from Kentucky. It's not relevant to this bill. There'll be another occasion, I'm sure, where his proposal to terminate financial assistance to Egypt will be relevant and should be brought up, but it shouldn't be brought up on this bill. Because it's not relevant, and it's exactly those kinds of irrelevant amendments that too often get the Senate into a gridlock situation that means that we don't get our job done and makes the public even more dissatisfied with us. So I thank Senator McCain for speaking to that. Senator McCain has introduced an amendment which I oppose, but it is relevant, and it ought to be debated. And I know that the majority leader is very open to working out a process by which amendments from both caucuses will be introduced, and introduced in a timely way. There are several colleagues on the Democratic side that have amendments they want to offer as well. So I hope that Senator Collins and I and Senator Reid and Senator McConnell can work together to begin to reach a bipartisan agreement where we can take up amendments that are relevant. Senator McCain's is one of them. We can debate them and get something done here. I mean, too often the public is so frustrated and angry at us because we leave problems unsolved because we get stuck in partisan or ideological or procedural gridlock. This is a real problem. The Post Office lost more than $13 billion in the last 2 years. Would have been $5 billion more if we hadn't waived a payment responsibility that the post office had to the retirees' health benefit plan. This can't go on this way, and if we don't act, it's not as if nothing will happen. Something will happen. The post office will continue to spiral downward, and the postmaster will inevitably have to impose really dramatic cuts in services and personnel. So I think it's our responsibility to create a set of rules and procedures here that acknowledge the need for change in the Postal Service, create a process, well, really actually authorize the Post Office to do some things it hasn't been able to do up until now to raise more money, and create a process for changing the business model of the U.S. Postal Service so it can survive in a very different age, the age of email, and also flourish, because so many people in our country depend on it for doing so. 563 million pieces of mail get delivered by the U.S. Postal Service every day. So this is not some kind of irrelevant, antiquated relic somewhere. This is a beating, functioning, critically important element of our life, our commerce, and our culture, and a lot of people depend on it. So we got a responsibility to change it, to keep it alive. I thank the chair, and I would yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Maine.
Madam President, at a later time, I'm going to